So this week, week 11, we're looking at chapter 11, field research. Within field research can be qualitative and quantitative. Very often it is thought more of as a qualitative research methodology, but we can also generate statistical data for them. For example, for watching a group of people, we might be able to count every time they do a certain behavior that we're accounting for, such as stealing from a store. So we do that through direct observation, but also in field research we can walk up to people and we can ask questions. And there's some methodologies where you do a combination of direct observation and asking questions, where you might observe somebody and then walk up to them and ask them why they did what they did once they volunteer for your study. With field research and much of the qualitative types of methods, we're not testing a hypothesis. What we're doing is we're asking a research question. For example, why do people steal? What is the quality of life of individuals after release from jail? Things like that. Topics appropriate for field research, things that we really want to understand completely. To be able to go inside of something and really understand that phenomenon, oftentimes called phenomenology, because we want to really understand the lived experience. It has great validity. So field research, qualitative and mixed methodologies, quantitative, qualitative methodologies have really good validity. The reliability isn't so good because it's hard to generalize them to other populations. So they're really good for looking at, if we want to, for example, go into a natural setting, we're in there right with the drug dealers to help to be able to distinguish them and the customers, and and find out what their lived experience is. And what that oftentimes does, through that research question, we go into that research and we find out the different characteristics and variables that drug dealers and customers have, and we may use those variables to do more quantitative research to start being able to generate reliability. So ethnography, which field research is, it focuses on a detailed and accurate description rather than just explaining a variable. So there's various ways in which a researcher can gather their data through their observations in their field research. And one way is complete participant, where you may fully engage in whatever activity and phenomenon and things like that you're studying, and they don't even know, the participants, actually they're not participants, they're subjects at this point because they're not participating in the study, they just happen to be a subject of the study and they don't know it yet, where you go in and do what they're doing in order to observe. Sometimes you can get really rich data by fully engaging in the activity. Now, you're probably not going to want to do that with drug dealing and prostitution and things like that, but it may work out if you're looking for certain types of data within a prison system, and you, as a researcher, you might take on a job as a prison guard for a few months to observe. That possibly could be an ethical study, but when you do complete participant research, when you're fully engaged and they don't know it, that does bring up many times ethical issues. So it's really important that you run your research through an institutional review board, IRBs. Participant as observers, so you let the people know that you're there to observe them. For example, let's say you want to watch prostitutes and johns on the street corner, and they're wondering why this dude is looking at them. Instead of doing that, and they might move to a different corner if you don't tell them who you are. You might walk over to them and say, "Hey, I'm a researcher. I'm not talking to the police or law enforcement. I just want to see the interactions, and if you can get some buy-in, they might allow you to observe their interactions, possibly." Observer as participant, and when I say actions, I mean them on the corner. You don't follow them to where they're going. But observer as participant, so let them know that you're observing them, kind of like the first one, or the last one there, where you're letting them know that you're observing. But instead of being an outside observer, just kind of watching from a distance, you're a person who's participating right in the whatever you're researching. And there's a lot of good anthropological studies, such as Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead, and Coming of Age in Samoa and things like that, where their subjects knew that they were being studied by this person, but they fully engaged in the behaviors. I shouldn't say 100% fully, because there's some things that they might not have done, but they were an active participant. And then a complete observer completely stands back without becoming a participant at all. They don't necessarily know that you're watching them, and you're completely out of it. So that's a complete observer. So when you're doing field research, you have to record the data somehow. And some good ways of recording the data, just taking notes, taking really extensive notes. Tape recording, when I did a mixed methodology, but a good portion was interviews, I tape recorded all the interviews. And then also using dictations, where you might be talking into nowadays like a phone or something where you're being recorded, but some type of recording device. But make sure you know, especially if people are participants where they know that they're being studied, that they sign off on informed consents and things like that. But take good field notes, observations recorded as written notes. A lot of times in that nice little leather-bound field journal, you know, when I think about anthropology. And anthropologists also can study criminal phenomenon. So a lot of times they'll first take sketchy notes, and then when they go back to the hotel or go back to wherever, they more fully write out what they experienced. Not after a week or two where they might be misremembering things, but as soon as possible they'll more fully write. Because if you're sitting there writing every single observation, you might be missing a lot of things that are going on. So you want to write and be very detailed, like I was saying earlier, but when you're getting, you know, when you increase that detail, you don't want to do it necessarily sitting there with your head down. It's kind of like, you know, deer hunting's coming up, and it's kind of like going out deer hunting, and instead of watching for the deer, you're sitting down taking notes of all the different flowers and trees and things. I mean, that doesn't work. You have to have your head up. And then also structured observations, which are observations marked by closed-ended forms which produce numeric data, where, for example, if you're counting, you know, you're sitting on a street corner and you count the number of drug dealers or johns or prostitutes, or in a supermarket looking at how many people steal, and you're, you know, observing a certain section for so long, and every time somebody does something that you're counting, you just check it off, and that can be a structured, or is a structured observation. So let's take a look at some field research studies. First example we'll give is shoplifting. So when the offense takes place, and you have to provide that operational definition of what stealing actually is. And, you know, for example, it might be concealing something in, you know, under your clothing, or is it walking out of the building? Is that considered stealing for the purposes of your research? But anyway, so once you do that, you are you might decide to follow shoplifters and or follow people to see what percentage of people then shoplift. So you're incognito as a shopper, it's the secret shopper type of thing, except you're a researcher, and you go, you know, follow folks around. And then, you know, part of the validity measure, you might be able to, because, I mean, there's going to be a certain amount of people that, you know, are going to have false positives, false negatives, where you might see somebody put something in their pocket, but it was just kind of an airhead moment, and they, you know, knew they had it there, and then they will pay for it. But you're counting that as stealing. And then there's other cases where a person might be really good, and they quickly, you know, shove it in their pocket, and you don't see that. or they notice you following them. So there's those types of things. So some research, they'll have people, researchers that aren't known to the other researchers going in, or they might hire people to go shoplift on purpose to, obviously like Target or whatever would know that these aren't real shoplifters, but the researchers don't know that, so they go in and they take things, and that provides a balance for the psychometrics or validity measures, as well as reliability. But again, reliability isn't as much of a it's a huge factor because there isn't much reliability in field research. So the next study I want to talk about is the use of seatbelts. We want to see how many people are using their seatbelts. So we may station ourselves at a certain roadside spot, but the things with seatbelts is a lot of the times we're not going to know, tinted windows, puppy dogs sitting on laps, things like that, where it isn't as easy to see if somebody's wearing their seatbelt or not. So we want to make sure that researchers don't just say, it looked like they were wearing their seatbelt, let's just say yeah. Or, nah, I don't know. And because, shirt colors and things like that can blend in or maybe look like seatbelts. So if you're not sure, making sure that you put on certain. And your uncertain might be, 80% of the people that come by. But that 20% you're looking at, you might have really good validity and possibly even starting to generate some reliability if you do it long enough and for a fairly large sample size. So in wrapping this up, sorry it went a little longer than I thought it would, but this field research I really like field research. So strengths and weaknesses of field research. So field research provides a better in-depth understanding of a phenomenon, that phenomenology, that lived experience of what people are experiencing. Because of that, though, there's less reliability. You can't generalize what we find in this one person, this group of people, or even with the seatbelt thing, you can't necessarily generalize that one highway with the rest of the country. But it has very high validity in most cases. So field research, because we're totally understanding, or really trying to totally understand a phenomenon, getting that 360-degree view of what's going on, because we're there, we're watching, we're taking in as much information as we can. The researcher is the instrument in field research, so we can generate some really good high validity. And oftentimes, because of that, it's more appropriate to measure a behavior than through some other quantitative measures and surveys and things like that. But remember, the generalizability, the reliability, not as good. And precise samples, or precise probability samplings, aren't normally drawn out of field research and qualitative methods because we oftentimes carefully select the people that we want to research. For example, if we want to do a research on serial killers, we might want to talk to somebody who has a lot of experience in that department. So if we're wanting to learn about serial killers from a law enforcement standpoint, we might want to talk to somebody like Robert Russell or John Douglas. And if we want to, from a criminal standpoint, we would want to talk to, who are some living ones? I don't know, like the dead ones, Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, folks like that. But before they get executed and killed in prison and whatever. But anyway, that wraps up week 11. If you have any questions about the course so far, make sure you're getting those, getting on top of those, your research proposals. And if you have any questions about that or anything within the course, please email, call, text, whatever you need to do to ask those questions.